If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Lore by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we shall review Love Beyond Death, a sourcebook for Wraith the Oblivion. I shall present my thoughts and opinions on its presentation and mechanics to help you better decide whether this is the sourcebook for you. Romance, love, and lust in stories is like fine dining. Too much, and your meal is fucked. The prep is sloppy, the lavender is overbearing, and your pasta is swimming in a lake of its own cringe. It is like Marmite, or Vegemite, as you Yanks call it. You either hate it, or you love it. It is like a good steak. Some people like it rare, whilst other freaks like it overdone. Food analogies aside, striking that fine balance in games is hard, whether your players are in a relationship of some description in-game, or someone is trying to smash that particular NPC. It naturally presents its own challenges for the players, who are the ones undertaking said pursuits. While some core books cover how to address and tackle said topics, I've always felt it can be lacking, as the topic of romance is shoved in the consent chapter, and therefore cannot explore the subject in huge amounts of detail. You could write a whole book on the topic. Well, it turns out that they, White Wolf Publishing, did just that in 1994, almost 30 years ago, which has suddenly made me feel rather old. Anyway, the book in question is tonight's focus. Love Beyond Death is a Wraith the Oblivion sourcebook that covers romance and relationships in Wraith games. It also contains 4 stories for you to use in your chronicles as standalone one-shots or as part of your ongoing chronicle. But just how good is it of a wingman? Does it cause the heart to race, or does it leave one with the cold feet? Well, before we dive into the book review proper, here are the rules to the Lore by Night book reviews. I will explore snippets of the lore, mechanics and rules found within the tome. I will look as to how they are presented and easily they are conveyed to new and old players alike. As this is a review written and presented by me, all thoughts and opinions are my own, so if you disagree with something I have said, that is totally fine. It does not mean that you are right and I'm wrong and vice versa. As with my previous book reviews, I will start at the very beginning, which is the physical book itself, which currently sits nicely upon my lap. Unlike most of the books I've reviewed, this one is a soft cover, rather than a hard copy, so I can't copy and paste the same part of my previous scripts this time. The background, as per many a Wraith the Oblivion book, consists of the metallic blue chains covering a similarly painted background, which is the first edition design. Of course, this isn't the main centerpiece of the cover. What we have is what I'm going to poorly describe as a flushed Wraith mime whose shadow lingers in the background. It's very striking, if a peculiar piece. It is very clearly a Wraith the Oblivion piece for sure, but one that doesn't resonate with feelings of love to me. I suppose one could interpret the redness on the hollow face of the Wraith as blood, probably that of a lover, the shadow's appearances signaling that it pushed the Wraith into something it shouldn't have done, which is far more fitting personally. It's the blank face that puzzles me here. Perhaps they were trying to emulate the screen but couldn't for whatever reason? Perhaps legal reasons? Anyway, the back page is not as striking, nor does it present any art that is up for vague interpretation. What is presented here is a more standard blurb against a peachy, misaligned rectangle superimposed onto the aforementioned Wraith chain idea. This would be an appropriate time to talk about the artwork found in this book. As mentioned in previous Wraith-focused book reviews, I have fallen in love with the artwork in Wraith the Oblivion books over the last couple or so years, all of which I have found terribly moving, and whilst this book does not have the most visually striking artwork, it certainly has some of the deeper and most thought-provoking of pieces. The pieces I find taking up 3 different styles. First, you have these almost noir thriller styles that take up the pages at the beginning of each chapter, each one capturing a different mood, be it tragedy, sorrow, solitude, and even righteousness. The second style, dotted about the chapters, has a far more gothic approach that feels like it belongs in an old horror film, capturing the unique brand of romanticism that can only they and Wraith the Oblivion can pull off in such graceful perfection. Then there is the art for the character frames in the stories, and I am not fond of any of them for the sole reason that they seem a little out of place and how each character is described in the stories. The The most puzzling of this is in the first story, where an illustration of the two main characters are presented in full glamorous detail at the beginning of the chapter, whose wrongdoings have clearly tainted them, which you can tell by their eyes. Then you compare that to their illustrations for the character profiles at the tail end of the book, and it has a more goth punk look to them. Again, that is not to say the portraits here are bad, quite the opposite in fact. It was just a little jarring in terms of tone shift. When you open the book and read the poem and contents page, you are greeted with the first chapter of the book, which serves as the introductory chapter. It details what the book aims to cover and what you will find inside. It does this by describing the nature of romance and the star-crossed lovers trope and how that integrates into Wraith the Oblivion and ghost stories in general. There is also a brief discussion that addresses that Wraith the Oblivion leans more into the gothic romantic genre rather than gothic punk, something that I theorized about since first reading Wraith the Oblivion 20th Anniversary Edition, which was my intro into Wraith the Oblivion, just in case you didn't know. Anywho, the chapter ends with a short paragraph on how to use the short stories, which is a rather redundant paragraph in how it is written, but I suppose it would benefit the newest of STs in some capacity. Chapter 2 is where the book properly starts, which definitely didn't cause any confusion whatsoever when I sat down to write this review. It addresses the ST personally, reminding them that mechanics are not as important as they may deem them to be, but rather one's quick wits and thinking, things that build up with practice and experience. Obviously, with a focus on love and romance, the chapter addresses the prep the storyteller should focus on should romance appear as a concept before or during a chronicle. The first of these themes is boundaries, which is very well written. A detail I am fond of is addressing how one thing can seem okay one day, but then the next it may not, for whatever reason, and that is perfectly okay to be flexible in that regard. Feelings change, life happens, and it is the role of the storyteller to make sure everyone is feeling comfortable regarding the session by keeping communications open and facilitating a friendly space, and that some trust is there. This also includes a section of dealing with difficult players, which is a wording I have always preferred over problem players, as not every bit of friction at the table is caused by someone being a non-consensual asshole. So, for all those fuckwits that complain about consenting gaming and TTRPGs, how us little flowflakes are ruining your world of darkness, it has been a feature in the world of darkness for some 30 years now, so sit on that lemon and swivel. The chapter then goes on to encourage storytellers to commit to the intentions and emotions of the scene to make things feel and sound authentic, from treating the space you're playing to loosening up the style and getting character, inspiring STs to make a fool of themselves if they have to, if it means delivering the scene or that bit of dialogue just right. This then leads on how to approach seduction and sex during a session, and it's always best to handle those themes with subtlety and care as an actual extension of the plot. It doesn't offer information on ERP, erotic roleplay, so find another way to beat your meat. After this is a little section on how groups of different sizes can be involved with romantic or familial plot lines and the pros and cons of each. The chapter ends with a double-page spread on how particular mechanics in Wraith affect romance in Wraith games, which is really the first proper instance of this feeling like a Wraith the Oblivion book. Its main focuses are on the shadow and angst, which is understandable, but there is information on skin riding, affecting the skinlands, pathos and passions, and eidolion and willpower. Short paragraphs they may be, but there's a lot of information to interpret from both the perspective of the storyteller and player. The next chapter is about placing love and romance in a chronicle of varying sizes and topics. It starts with the scale of love in a plot, whether it's the central theme as a smaller scale, or epic romance, or even as a subplot. Various ideas are presented to the reader on how to go about presenting such stories and the differences between them all, asking the readers questions to make them think and expand their horizons. What I feel this section is missing are examples of them in media to better help the reader relate to said love scales. It does this for the epic romance heading, but lacks so for the others. This continues with the story suggestions section of the chapter. Like with love as the central theme before it, different moods are explored and questions are addressed to the reader to encourage them to think and poke the imaginative brain. Unlike the previous section, it does not just expand on what the likes of unrequited love and familial love mean, but ties those definitions into Wraith the Oblivion, sadly beautiful, just as it should be. The fault I have with this chapter is the insensitive hook in the historical section of the chapter, the line that reads, "What might it be like to play one of Robert Bum's lost paramours, or a murdered slave returning to her homeland in search for her rightful husband?" I'm sure a small selection of groups could make it work, but I don't want to see that group play their game or anywhere near mine. The next 4 chapters of the book are the aforementioned stories that can take up 1 or 2 short sessions of Wraith the Oblivion. Each one covers an array of different themes and moods presented by the book before it. The range of NPCs and cast to interact with are nuanced and varying levels of tragic, as each story presents a variety of ways the story could carry on if you decide what happens next, or you want to spice things up with a pool of variations in the plot. A CEO of one plot may suddenly become connected with Pentex. A scientist of another story could be a mage, or a powerful wraith looking for a lost loved one is a spectre who feels the pull of humanity once more. There's lots of ideas and overall great stories to be found here. Despite being nearly 30 years old, I am not going to give a deeper analysis of each story, as I think it's only fair to give you, the beautiful listener, to have some surprises. What I will share is that my favourite of these stories is The Price of Love. Finally, there is a short appendix filled with some love-themed artifacts, one of which appears in one of the stories, which did confuse me when I first read it because it seemed out of place seeing an artifact being mentioned and having no reference to it straight away. There are also 6 NPCs you could use in your own games. As a Brit, one has to mention Anne Boleyn. Which kinda brings me onto my main bit of criticism with the book, and that it is a Wraith the Oblivion book. Despite its small stature, Love Beyond Death is one of the most eloquent World of Darkness books to date, presenting a very mature essay on consent and boundaries at the table, and the many different ways love and romance can be used as a plot device and handled in games. It is very easy to take this book and incorporate it into any TTRPG, not just limiting to it to Wraith. Now, I have no idea how well this book sold or how popular it was, but the fact that I, a Wraith the Oblivion nut, stumbled upon this book by accident and was surprised by the existence of its presence is probably an indicator that it's not well known in the World of Darkness line. What would have been nicer, or perhaps more marketable, is to advertise it as a World of Darkness book and include similar chapters regarding all the splats that were available at the time, each one with their own stories for storytellers to present to their players. It would have made it more expensive at a larger book for sure, but it would have made it more accessible to World of Darkness fans. If cost was an issue, make the stories and the book as a whole more universal, strip all the ties to Wraith and offer suggestions on how to tailor them to each specific splat, keeping and expanding each of the variations. In short, whilst less is certainly more, this book definitely needed more. And for those of you who are new to the Lore by Night brand and the reviews I occasionally do, I do not do out of 10 scores because they are subjectively pointless. One person's 10 out of 10 is another's 3 out of 5 stars, which is another's minus 42 out of 100, so I shall rate this book Engagement Ring out of 10, as that is just as helpful as a proper out of 10 score. To be kept updated, follow the Lore by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.